The screaming started before the engine even cooled. I had just parked my '70 Plymouth Hemi Cuda in the driveway, its 900 horsepower roar still echoing through the cul-de-sac, when the HOA queen herself, Karen, came charging out with her clipboard like she was storming Normandy. She didn't even bother to hide her disgust as her eyes darted over the candy apple red body, the gleaming chrome, the flawless detail that car enthusiasts around the world would pay fortunes just to touch. "This junk doesn't belong here," she barked, her voice shrill enough to rattle the windows of her own beige, cookie-cutter McMansion. Junk. That was the word she chose for a machine appraised at over $3 million. Neighbors began peeking through blinds, hungry for drama, as Karen rattled off HOA codes and threatened fines, towing, and permanent removal of the violation. She didn't realize her so-called junk car wasn't just worth more than her entire life savings. It was my crown jewel, the centerpiece of a collection insured for sums she couldn't even count. But the real punch: I didn't just park my car here, I owned here. The land beneath her house, the deed to her street, the block she strutted across like some suburban tyrant, and I hadn't said a word yet. I let her dig her own grave with threats and arrogance, already knowing the revelation I was about to unleash would shatter her composure, her reputation, and her grip on this neighborhood forever. Karen's tantrum escalated like a wildfire fed by gasoline. She planted herself in front of my car as though blocking access would somehow validate her authority, waving her clipboard like a sheriff serving warrants in an old western. "This isn't a racetrack," she snapped, her voice cutting through the sticky summer air. "The HOA rules are clear. No junk vehicles, no eyesores, no exceptions." Her words were designed to humiliate, and her tone carried the smugness of someone who thought she had the entire neighborhood wrapped around her finger. I leaned back against the driver's side door, arms crossed, and watched as more neighbors emerged from their homes, lured by the scent of pending drama. Phones came out, lenses gleaming, and suddenly Karen's little performance had an audience. She thrived on this, feeding off the illusion of power, believing she was about to publicly put me in my place. But what she didn't realize was that I had been waiting for this exact moment. With deliberate calm, I slid my sunglasses down my nose, letting my eyes meet hers, and said nothing. Silence unnerved her more than any insult could have. She doubled down, threatening to have the car towed within the hour, even daring to say she'd contact city code enforcement personally. The crowd murmured, half in agreement, half in disbelief, but I could see their curiosity sharpening. They wanted to know why I wasn't reacting, why I wasn't bowing to Karen's manufactured authority. That was the beauty of it. I didn't need to raise my voice, I didn't need to argue. I only needed to wait until the right sentence, one that would flip this entire script, rolled off my tongue like a grenade with the pin already pulled. And as Karen puffed herself up for her grand finale threat, I knew exactly when to drop it. Karen's voice had reached a fever pitch, each word dripping with venom as she declared she would personally see my junk heap dragged off the property by sunset. The crowd leaned closer, some smirking, others whispering nervously, as though they were witnessing a public execution. That's when I finally straightened up, slid my sunglasses back into place, and stepped forward. My boots clicked against the concrete with deliberate weight, the kind of sound that makes a mob go silent. "Junk," I said, my voice low but sharp enough to cut through the humid air. "This junk was appraised last month at $3 million. It's one of only a handful left on Earth, and collectors have offered me more than you'll make in 10 lifetimes, just for the chance to sit in it." Gasps rippled through the crowd, phones snapped closer for video, and Karen's smirk faltered for the first time, though she tried to mask it with another eye roll. "That's impossible," she scoffed, but the confidence had cracked. I pulled out my phone, swiped, and held the glowing screen inches from her face. Notarized appraisal documents, digital certificates of authenticity, and proof of insured value that made her jaw clench tighter than a vice. Murmurs from the neighbors turned into open chatter, words like millions, rare, and untouchable floated through the air. Karen's face reddened, but she wasn't done. Her pride wouldn't allow her to retreat. She puffed up, again, insisting that car value didn't change the fact that rules were rules. That was the moment I felt the grin tug at my lips. She thought the revelation about the car was the end of the story. What she didn't know was that it was only the beginning, because what I was about to reveal next wouldn't just silence her, it would dismantle her entire reign over this neighborhood in a single sentence. Karen's breathing grew sharp and uneven, the clipboard shaking in her grip as she tried to salvage her dignity in front of a neighborhood that was suddenly more entertained than intimidated. "Fine," she snapped, her voice straining under the weight of disbelief. "So, you've got a shiny toy worth some money. That doesn't change the fact that this neighborhood is governed by the HOA, and as president, I decide what stays, and what goes. This car is an eyesore, and I'll see it removed whether you like it or not." The smugness had returned, but it was forced now, brittle and hollow. She thought she was still holding the reins. That was when I laughed, not a chuckle, but a slow, deliberate laugh that echoed across the driveways like a crack of thunder rolling in before a storm. Every head turned to me, the tension snapping tighter, the phones raised higher. I took one step closer to her, lowering my voice so every word landed like a hammer. Karen, you don't seem to understand. You don't control this block. She scoffed again, but I didn't let her interrupt. I reached into my jacket, pulled out a neat leather folder, and flipped it open. Deeds, stamped, notarized, and ironclad. I do, I said, my tone sharp as a blade. The ground under your feet, the street you're standing on, the houses you think you govern, I own the block. The silence that followed was deafening, like the entire world had frozen for a beat. Karen's face went slack, her lips parting but no sound escaping. The crowd broke into stunned murmurs, a chorus of disbelief mixing with gleeful whispers as neighbors realized their so-called queen had just been dethroned in broad daylight. I held her gaze unblinking, while the reality sank in. This wasn't just about a car anymore. This was about power, and hers had just evaporated in front of everyone. Karen's face twisted in a way that was almost cartoonish, a cocktail of rage, disbelief, and raw humiliation boiling under the surface as the crowd buzzed with excitement. Her voice cracked as she jabbed a manicured finger toward me. That's impossible. You're bluffing. No one just owns an entire block. The words tumbled out fast, shrill, desperate. I didn't flinch. I simply held up the deeds higher, letting the gold notary stamps catch the sunlight so the crowd could see the glint of legitimacy. Neighbors pressed closer, squinting to catch a glimpse of the official documents that had suddenly rewritten the entire hierarchy of their community. Karen's composure shattered. She began pacing erratically, her flip-flops smacking the pavement in frantic rhythm, her voice growing louder. This man is lying. He's trying to manipulate all of you. We cannot let him intimidate our neighborhood. But it was too late. The tide had shifted, and everyone knew it. Mr. Dawson, a retired judge from across the street, stepped forward with a slow, deliberate nod after looking at the papers. These are real, Karen, he said, his gravelly voice carrying authority. This man isn't bluffing. He owns the land your house sits on. Gasps rippled through the gathering like a shockwave. Karen froze, her face draining of color. You could almost hear the glass shattering inside her fragile empire as the truth caved in around her. Her voice shrank, wobbling as she tried one last grasp at control. Then, I'll call the HOA board. We'll vote on this. She fumbled for her phone, hands trembling, dialing furiously as if a lifeline existed on the other end. But the neighbors weren't buying it anymore. Several people started openly laughing, others muttering things like, "She's finished, and we've put up with this long enough." Her son, red-faced and mortified, tugged at her arm, whispering for her to stop, but Karen shook him off with a wild look in her eyes. What was once her kingdom was slipping through her fingers in real time, and every second of her unraveling was being recorded by half the block, eager to upload her downfall to the world. Karen's desperate phone call was the final act of defiance in a play she no longer controlled, and everyone knew it. She barked into the phone, demanding an emergency HOA board meeting, her voice high-pitched and cracking as she tried to reclaim authority. But when the first patrol car rolled into the cul-de-sac, lights flashing, it wasn't the HOA cavalry she had expected. It was the county sheriff's deputies. Summoned not by Karen, but by one of the neighbors who'd grown sick of her antics. The sight of uniformed officers stepping out sent a visible ripple of relief through the crowd, as though justice itself had arrived to witness the finale. Karen launched into a frantic tirade the second they approached, pointing wildly at me, and screaming about junk cars, fake deeds, and fraudulent claims. The deputies stood impassive, letting her spiral while the rest of us waited for the inevitable implosion. When she finally shoved the documents in my hand, demanding they be confiscated, I calmly handed them to the lead deputy, who scanned the notarized seals with a trained eye. He looked up slowly, his expression measured but edged with authority, and said, "Ma'am, these are legal property deeds. He owns this block, including your house." The silence that followed was electric. Neighbors whispered, some openly chuckled, while Karen's knees buckled as though the words themselves had struck her physically. Her son buried his face in his hands, muttering for her to stop embarrassing them, but she was too far gone. In one last meltdown, she shrieked about conspiracies, corruption, and outsiders destroying her community. But the deputies had heard enough. They escorted her away from the crowd, her protests fading into incoherent rants as cameras captured. Every moment, the HOA board, terrified of being dragged down with her, resigned en masse within 48 hours. Their signatures inked on emergency notices that left the association powerless. In a poetic twist, the same neighbors who had once bowed to Karen's tyranny now stood on my side, clapping me on the back, offering drinks, and toasting the end of her reign. My $3 million car, once ridiculed as junk, became the neighborhood's pride and centerpiece, a gleaming symbol of how illusions of power collapse under the weight of truth. Within a month, I had established my own management trust for the block, one focused on community rather than control. The irony, Karen had no choice but to pay rent to me if she wanted to stay in her house. And each month, as her check arrived, With trembling handwriting on the envelope, it reminded her and everyone else that the HOA queen had been dethroned by the very man she tried to humiliate.